welcome everybody to episode 2 of our Goat Camp. Spike Camp's partnering up with Goat Alliance to do this series on all things mountain goats. We are lucky to have 2 Goat Alliance board members on the show tonight. We've got one of our own Canadian guys on here, Marvin, and we've got Adam. So what I'll do, guys, is I'm going to let you each do sort of a little self intro, and then we'll jump into the contents of the presentation. So maybe Adam, maybe you would go first, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll go first. Hi, everybody. My name's Adam Smith. I'm an Alaskan resident. I live in a little town in southeast Alaska, north of Juneau, called Skagway. Anybody up on their history would know that Skagway was the gateway to the Klondike. If anybody has heard of the Chilkoot Trail, Skagway was kind of that place where when the gold rush happened, this was the place everybody landed before they started their long march and journey up into the Yukon. I've lived here for just over 10 years now. My wife is born and raised here. Her family's been here since the gold rush. Lots of family history in this small town. Town I live in is 4 blocks wide and 22 blocks long. So we're just nestled in the bottom of the valley. Since I've lived here for 10 years, like I said, I'm originally from Kansas, flatlander at heart, fell in love with the mountains, came up here. First thing I got into was goats and bears and kind of never looked back, and became very infatuated with mountain goats and mountain hunting, and wanted to be, a part of the conservation side of things with mountain goats, because in my area, there's not a lot of presence with the local fish and game and bios. And so it was like, well, how can I do more, get more involved? And then that kind of pushed me over into the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance, and I've tried to be involved since I think as early as 2018. I became a regional rep in 2021 timeframe, and then I joined the board of directors here just this past year. So I'm really excited about where the Goat Alliance is headed. We've got a huge ceiling, and super excited to be a part of the organization.
That's awesome, Adam. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll flip it over to Marvin.
All right. So yeah, great to be here, and that we have a nice turnout again on our second session. So Marvin Kwiatkowski, born and raised in BC. I've lived in a few other provinces when I did some schooling. I grew up basically outside of Prince George, snaring rabbits, and I pretty much climbed whatever I could find, anything and anything. Ended up in the hospital for a few extended stays because of my adventures. But you know the saying, if you're going to be dumb, you better be tough. So hopefully I'm tougher than smarts, but still have a few lives left in me. Generally not too concerned about heights generally, but I am claustrophobic, which is interesting. I've been on the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance board of directors for 2 years now, and since last spring, the board chair. I'm trained as a civil engineer, work in senior management currently. I don't really use what I learned in school anymore. And I still say the worst day goat hunting is still better than my best day at work. I've been married for 30 years. She's been a patient woman. I got 3 children, and they're growing up really fast. Still have 2 teenagers left. My other one's married. And I started goat hunting in the mid-1990s. And my first big animal was actually a goat, and I've been on a few goat hunts since that time. I do primarily mountain hunt, but I do plan to hunt moose, elk, and deer when I'm old. And I love all things goats, including the goat roast that I just ate. And that was a November goat, so we might get into that later, but most goat meat is phenomenal. I love it. And yeah, I'm passionate about goats, and that's probably why I'm on the Goat Alliance, because I felt there was a great opportunity, and we needed representation to me in all areas where there's goats. And a few years ago, we didn't have a lot of representation in British Columbia, so I jumped on, and it's been no looking back. Okay.
Well, that's awesome. Sorry to interrupt there, Mark. You go right ahead and kick right into your presentation. And
so we'll start here. Basically, Adam and I are just tag teaming the presentation. We didn't really go through it in advance, but we got the slides we went through. We're going to talk about the goat sex identification. That's really a big component of it. There's 20 slides on that alone. And then we're going to get into the 4 seasons of goat hunting. And then hopefully we got time for Q&A, because we're looking for some good questions and hopefully some good answers. As you can see, to hunt goats, one must become a goat. You can see there's a fellow climbing that pretty steep mountain there in that photo. He kind of blends in well. But yeah, goat hunting requires a lot of steep terrain, and it gets a little nasty at times. To the first slide here, I really want to start off sort of in the bigger picture of conservation and the role that hunters play in that. It's a huge part of the whole conservation of goats is the hunters, and looking to make sure that we are selecting the right animal, and particularly when it comes to goats, the right sex. So we want to see healthy goat populations throughout all the jurisdictions. I'm assuming we have people in different provinces and states attending this. And there is concerns in some areas more than others. Even areas that have high goat populations, there are concerns. Even in some areas of British Columbia, there is a high nanny harvest, which is of concern. So the key is, and if you see on the photo here, that beautiful Darrenette photo, on the right side, you can see the little ones. We want to see more of those little kids coming along each year to ensure that there is a healthy population. Moving on to the benefits. So we can talk about don't harvest nannies and don't harvest kids, of course, because generally that will not be harvesting of kids. Know your regulations. In most areas, harvesting a kid will be illegal, and in most jurisdictions, harvesting a nanny will be discouraged. But there are some areas in particular where there are higher nanny populations, so there are the odd areas that you can hunt nannies. This slide here, most of you've probably seen this, but it really shows the difference. This is just a mock-up, but it's probably fairly accurate in some ways. If a hunter selects a billy, as in the first row there to the left, you can see there's 5 goats in that top corner. There's a mix of billies and nannies, and then the kid. And then if you go down to year 5, you got 14 goats. So if you take the one billy out, you're left with 14. Then if you go over to the middle row where the hunter selects a nanny, starting again with the 5 goats, and then after year 5, you're down to 10. And then if the hunter selects a nanny with a kid, again, it's a worse situation. You're actually down to 7 goats. So that's just a rough, sort of numerical look at what the population is going to be like. And the key with nannies is they don't reproduce. They don't typically start to reproduce till they're in their 4th year, and they don't have offspring every year. So that's important to know. They're not mass producing, say, 2 kids a year every year. So we have to be careful on selecting the right billies typically. And I'm going to pass this over to Adam to take the first one here and start the adventure on this section.
Okay, so we're kind of just jumping right into sex identification, and kind of just going to go off the cuff with everybody. And I think what we decided was, were we going to have everybody kind of put their guesses for each slide in the chat? Is that what we decided?
Yeah, let's try that just to see how
Okay.
it goes. I won't be able to see it, but yeah, and it's going to just be quick at the start end. Just say you think that's
cool.
an
So
answer.
so every time we hit a new slide, just everybody, if you've got a guess right away, throw it up, and then we'll talk about it and kind of talk about what we see in each slide. So I'm going to kind of let things progress here. Let everybody kind of throw their thing up. Don't cheat in the chat either. Don't look at other people's answers. This is teachers watching. Okay, so we're getting a pretty good. Yeah, everybody's saying Billy, it looks like. Okay, so yeah, definitely a Billy. So we could assume that this is a typical urination posture. Can't actually, I don't know if we actually can see any urine coming out there. But like some things that jump out at me, if you weren't looking necessarily, he wasn't telling you textbook, like, hey, he's not taking a piss. Like the other things you could look at is he's kind of got a little bit of a Roman nose. Nannies won't get that. He's got a longer horse face. you can see the glands. The glands aren't very pronounced. In the short hair, I'm assuming July or August goats that have already shed and have these short coats, you can really see the muscular structure of the front shoulder, which is always more pronounced in males than females. It's just another thing you can look for. This one does not have a urine patch or a dirty patch on his back haunches, which is always a good indicator to look for. But yeah, everybody looks like they came up with Billy there. So that's the first one. If anybody has questions as we're going through these, if you throw them up in the chat, I feel like that would be good so that we can just hammer them as we go through. And instead of at the end, somebody being like, hey, on this slide, on this picture, you know, what about this? So if anybody has questions, please throw them up. I'm kind of monitoring the chat as we go through here. Moving on to the next one here on.
Hey, Adam, I have a quick question. Just sorry to interrupt here.
No,
with regards to the glands, what brings the size up, or I guess they probably don't reduce in size. Is that just age? As they get older, the glands get bigger. Is that an age indicator, or what? How does that work?
I don't know if Marvin has a better answer for that than I do. I do know that you will see glands in nannies from time to time, but I believe it's more of a rutting thing. And anybody can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here, but from what I recall hearing was that every time they go through a rut process, their glands will swell. And I've actually seen billies rub these glands on alders, as they come down low to rut. And I've seen them, polish their horns, but they're rubbing those glands on alders and stuff. And I'm not a biologist, and I don't have the answer to that, but I do believe that it is rut related. I don't know if Marvin wants to chime in if he has anything. Or
I typically haven't seen. There are the glands earlier, but it seems like more in the rut that they're going to be larger and more noticeable. But it is true, there are nannies that show the glands, typically not as pronounced. But yeah, typically it's more in the rut.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any kind of a correlation with the glands, being more large on certain animals than other animals. It's a great question. We can field to one of our biologists. I'm actually going to write that down.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. I want to know the answer. Marvin, you've got me on the slides. Yeah. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do we see on this one? I can tell you as you guys throw your answers up that my knee jerk on this one is that it's a young goat. And what tells me that is you kind of see his face and it looks cute and small. Typically with a larger billy, you're going to get more of a longer face. Like you think of it in terms of triangles, you get more of an equilateral triangle out of a young goat. And then you get more of a longer isosceles type triangle with an older goat. If you're looking at him head on, it's kind of a way that I think of it sometimes. He's got incredible growth. If you look at him close, he's like, I don't know. I got to blow it up here on my screen. I think he's maybe, 5 at the most. So for a goat to be that young and have that kind of horn growth, some notes that I had on this billy are he's probably from somewhere in southern BC because I know who took the photo. He's got a short, cute face. Obviously he's still grown into his body, but something that was kind of a red flag to me was, which is something I've experienced in the field, is these kind of goats can be somewhat deceiving to an inexperienced hunter. You might see horns like that on a billy like that and think, wow, this is a 12-inch billy. Like I'm looking at an absolute hammer. He's going to go book. And then, we all know what the term ground shrinkage is for a reason, because you'd see those big horns and it looks like they probably are big horns. But you can get into that situation if you have a young goat with good growth early. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're in the field, to take in all of the different variables that you're looking at. He's got great bases, obviously, screams that he's a billy, right? He's kind of got a little bit of a dirt patch on his haunches there on his rear quarter. and you can kind of see the glands, but again, short, cute face tells me it's a young goat. If you're out to harvest a billy, that's a good billy. Like, but a lot of people personally would like to see an older age class goat, let him walk, and maybe come see him in 3 to 4 years, and when he's really put on some growth. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, Marvin.
Okay, so I'm out of. I actually can see the screen now better, but now I'm out of presentation mode. They're saying. Do you see that?
I don't think it's a big deal, but
Yeah,
whatever works for you.
Yeah. So there, I can at least I can see, but like I can see. Okay, let's see how I do here. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so I'll just move on to this one. I should have mentioned this more at the outset, but the fact we're just looking at photos and basically just a one point in time, which makes it, we're not seeing the full picture. We're basically looked at a zoomed in goat in general on all these photos. Obviously, the time of year you can sort of tell, but it's the larger context, and that's what you can see more when you're out hunting, of course. So yeah, just looking at one photo, and that's probably what we'll see with a lot of these, is it can be tricky. You're looking at one angle and basically one point in time. So you can't really notice, you can't see the goats moving. It's hard to sometimes establish, say, an age, because an old billy or an old nanny or billy, you'll see their gait, their walk is going to be a little more labored. So yeah, I'll just get into this one here. Let's say, what's the middle goat? So let's do the poll. Okay, I can actually see that.
So Marvin, while we're waiting here for the answers coming in, you mentioned that an older billy will have more of a labored gait and walk, like just sort of like the rest of us. The older you get, the stiffer you get. Okay.
They do. I haven't. It's probably it's in nannies too, of course. I just noticed it more in billies because I'm really looking at the billies. So yeah, I'll be showing some photos later of the older ones, and I can't show the gait unless I have the video. But okay, fourth one. What do we got? Fourth one in the back is a billy. I'm seeing 3 goats, but someone saw a fourth one. Middle looks like a billy. Okay, yeah. So obviously this looks more like in the rut. That's a typical situation that you'll see. That is what I'd call a younger billy in the middle. The 2 flanking on the outside more would be the nannies. You can see that they're just very thin horns. That middle one, again, larger body, a little bit dirtied up in the rear. So that's typically what they will do more in the rut, is they'll urinate in their beds and that sort of thing and get all dirty and smelly. But maybe not a really large billy, simply because the bases aren't that close together. You see the large scent glands. Face-wise, I can't really see how mature that is, but I'm going to guess that body's pretty big. He's probably 5 or a little bit more than that, but just not a large horn mass on that one. That's probably like a 9-inch billy, say, tops. Let's see what else here. Obviously, the large front end. So yeah, I think everyone did reasonably well on that one, from what I can see.
I would jump in here and say that in a few experiences of mine, those glands can get very swollen and deceive you to the size of the horns, especially during the rut. So I encountered a billy a few years back that to me, I thought he was small, and then got in tight with him, and turns out, he's got age rings stacked for a few inches, and his glands were so big that his horns, like this billy in this picture, they looked small. So it's another one of the many variables to keep in mind when you're hunting goats that time of year.
Yeah.
And you can see glands on the nanny to the left too. So I guess they're more of a secondary sort of indicator, right?
And it's very geographical too, right? Like and I think we'll get to this later too, but it's just something to keep in mind. Every area is different. So getting in and knowing the goats you're hunting and what is typical to see in that specific gene of goat on that area it's important to consider for sure.
Yeah, see, the problem with this is now I can't even forward the, okay. Let's try that. All right, so let's see what you put down for this one. So I can't see any responses, but Adam, what do you see in there?
We're seeing Billy.
Yeah.
Got 3 Billies so far.
So again, the context, and Adam had mentioned it, of kind of knowing where, what part of a province or a state these goats are from. So typically knowing that this is that's a Danny Coyne one, but same with a lot of the Darren's photos. If they're taken down in the Okanagan area, the genetics are phenomenal there. Many of the nannies are pretty heavy horn. So in this one here, you'd probably want a better look at it. I mean, yeah, I would say initially it looks like a Billy from that horn. But it's probably not a bad idea to give it a little bit more time, see if it stands up. I can't quite, it looks like a fairly mature face on it. I don't really see a Roman nose, but he does. He, assuming it's a he, looks fairly mature. But again, because of the area and knowing that's probably an Okanagan goat, I would take a better look yet, because you can't necessarily see, it looks like a pretty good curve on that horn, but you can't really see with that dark background if is a kink in there or not. So yeah, I would say this one you'd want to observe a little bit further.
Okay. So this one, let's keep in mind, as far as hunting ethically goes, what we saw in that last image. This one's pretty obvious what it is, but the reason I picked it was just because if you're not aware that nannies typically will bed downhill from their young kids, to keep them from falling asleep, rolling off the mountain. This is pretty typical, and you'll see it a lot, especially earlier in the season. As those kids get older, things will change. But this is just something that I wanted to show to just keep in mind if you're out in the field. Like, you most likely will see this. And if you're not for sure what you're shooting at, this is just a good reminder, like we learned when we were kids, to know our target and what lies beyond it. Because it would be a bad day to walk up and realize, oh no, what did I do? Right. So that's why we wanted to make sure we included that one. Because like I said, I was a flatlander, not something that was common knowledge to me. And time in the field, I've been fortunate enough to learn that, but I just thought that was something that was important we throw out there to everybody.
Does that help him defend like aerial predators too in that bedding position? I guess it kind of would, right?
I would imagine so. And, just like anybody, if you're sitting tight to the hill, you're not going to see anything from below like you are from above. So it'd be kind of silly for mom to be on the inside of I think it's just natural predation protection. But yeah, I personally haven't seen aerial attacks, and that picture was taken on Kodiak Island in 2017, I believe. There was a Billy in there too. He gave us a slip. Ultimately, we ended up getting him, but I thought that was a Billy, and I kept working around the hill, and I was like, oh, that Billy grew a set of nursers and has a baby. Okay.
Yep. Make sure I'm on the right one here. Okay. Yep. I got this one. So let's start off with the two, basically the two goats on the left in the left photo. So first put down what the left one would be, and then the right one. And then Adam, if you could sort of this before I start talking, kind of what are you seeing there for responses?
So far we have, I'll just go ahead and quote them. Holy that bottom guy. Couple dandies. Top is Billy. Billy on top. I think everybody's talking about that photo on the left there.
Yeah, they're looking at both those photos.
Yep.
Yeah, because the right one's different goats. But okay, so looks like Billy. So yes, those are both Billies basically in November in the rut. For interest's sake, that top one, of course, you can see it's a smaller goat. Even the face is not super mature. But you can see the horns look pretty good length. It's got that dirty rump. Looking at the hide condition, this is another thing I look at just for aging. So this goat looks pretty nice condition. You look at the other goat here, just to the right. That goat's a very old goat. So I would say it's about 12 years old. Looking at other goats, kind of comparing to other goats I've seen. I was looking to take that goat. It didn't work out. But I would call that a fairly old goat. And the way that goat moved around, very slowly, very methodically, it didn't have a lot of time for the younger goat here. You can't really see the horns very well, but they do look like more like a Billy, a little bit thicker in general. That's probably in size-wise. I mean, they look sort of similar size-wise. I would say as a goat gets really old, they're probably going to lose fat and some of the muscle mass. This goat up here is a 4-year-old Billy. It's 10.5 inch. So we took this one. My son took this goat because it was the only one that presented after a while. This is a day before we got into closer range. This photo's taken from 350 yards away with 2 canyons in between. So looks like we're close, but these goats would be very difficult to retrieve. So we did not shoot them. And that distance for me personally is getting out there a bit as far as my comfort zone for shooting an animal, just because sometimes you don't get a lot of extra shots, and that distance things can go south. And then first of all, you may not be able to retrieve the goats. So yeah, that's those 2 goats.
I'd hop in real quick, Marvin, and say that something to keep in mind when you're looking at what you've already distinguished as 2 Billies together. And if you're having trouble with horn length or whatever, kind of what Marvin had mentioned, aside from the coat condition, is if you look at, so growing up in Kansas, we called them swayback, right? So you see the saddle on the larger goat and how it's more defined, whereas on the younger goat, his saddle on his spine, on his back there, is not quite nearly as defined. And typically you'll see more of a pot belly on the older goats, more of a sagging belly on those older goats too. And then of course the face just screams that it's an older goat, but that's just another thing you can look at and look for when you're trying to determine age from a long distance.
So I won't ask you to ask what these goats are. They're Billies as well, but I just want to show, like, this one was an old goat. This one, you can see the face. This is an old goat as well. This was a 13-year-old Billy that we took. Basically, it's the same goat here on the upper right that's bedded. Here, the upper right goat is standing before it was taken. Again, the hide looks a little better than the other one, but the way that goat moved and the hide and the face was very droopy. So we got onto 7 mature Billies between 5 and 13 years old. And this old one, like, it just stood out. That's an old goat. The face is very droopy. The belly was sagging, and it moved really slow. So yeah, I just want to show, like, old goats are pretty apparent if you can find one. They kind of jump out amongst the crowd. Yeah, I don't know what else to say on that. Oh, while we got the horn length here, I mean, I don't really get into this anywhere else, but for judging horn length, I always go from the tip of the nose to the corner of the eye, and typically on big Billies, that's going to be about 8 inches. And I just do a quick measurement, and that's where it helps with phone digiscoping, is I just quickly measure it on my phone. I say put my thumb between the nose and the eye, And then I put that right up to the horn when it's sideways and move my thumb up on the photo. And if that looks like it's 2 inches beyond the measurement I just took, the 8 inches, then it's probably a 10-inch billy, and that's a pretty good billy to take generally. So yeah, that's kind of what I like to look at, is the side profiles. Some individuals use the ear length of, I think it's 4 inches. I never use the ears because the ears, I don't know, they can stick out. They just don't give a good indication to me personally. I know others do that. So I don't know what you do, Adam.
I typically do the same as you.
Okay.
But yeah, you keep in mind with a big old horse face billy can throw you off too.
Yeah. But I measure most goats I take, or I know whoever I'm with takes. I always like to measure right away just to see if that eye to nose measurement. Of course, that's coastal goats. So if you're talking more interior in the Rockies, your goats are going to have a smaller, bone structure. So it won't be the 8 inches typically. Okay, let's what both these goats are. Let's put your guesses down.
Can you see him, Marvin?
No,
Okay,
I've got into the
so-
full screen because you can see my
Okay,
full
yep.
screen, right?
Oh,
So
this is
up to
okay.
that.
Yep, I got you. So we have billies, nannies, 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 nannies based on horns. We have some more people typing still.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll probably start talking here while they're finishing up. Again, it's seeing the broader context, and these two goats are in a very large group. I can't remember if it was 40 or 50, but it was a pretty large group of goats. And typically in the summer, if there's going to be a large group together like that, I mean, you're not going to generally see a group of 40 billies. It's nannies and kids for the most part, but these ones are interesting because there's a really dirty butt there on both of them actually. So you first look at that, the bodies look all right. They're pretty beefy. I'd say they're mature nannies. You look at the horns, you can actually see probably more, both of them. If you look at the tips, there's actually, you could see the kink on them. So they kind of go straight up, then they kink. And just generally, there's less mass on both of those, right from the bases all the way up, quite thin on the horn. But if you just see these two goats together, depending on the area you're hunting, you could be deceived on these ones. But again, I think looking at the sideways, when they're sideways views, you'll see those horns kink at the tops quite a bit. Mature wise, I would say that left goat, I could be wrong, looks a little bit more mature on the face, but that's just my guess. And the body, it's hard to say, but I was just guessing that left one's a little bit older. But again, a couple nannies. And another thing of interest, I don't think we've mentioned it too much. In the summertime, so this is late August, the capes on the nannies are going to be in rougher shape for the most part. So late August with billies, the hides, they're starting to winter up a little bit. They're more uniform. They're, to me, usually about a month ahead of the nannies. So in this case here, you see, especially more on the right goat, the hair's a little bit rougher there. It looks like it hasn't lost all of its previous year's scruffy hide there yet. So that's another thing that it's kind of easier in the summer overall, like say August and September, to tell a nanny from a billy just because they're not as haired up. But then one of the first indications, I always look at the hide condition, and the billies generally look a lot better. Okay, this is the last of mine for a bit here. This one, take a guess.
I guess while people are guessing, there's something that came to mind while we were talking about that one. Is something to keep in mind is when you're trying to sex goats on the mountain, time of year comes into play huge. Like obviously none of us are hunting them in the early summer when the nannies are up having their kids. But early in the summer, you're going to see the nannies and the kids, at least in my experience, way up high in the cliffs, where they'll birth their kids for that year. And so just like depending on the season and where the goat is on the mountain, a lot of times will tell a story too. That's just something that came to mind.
Okay, what are the guesses looking like?
We have Billy, old Billy, nanny, Billy, big nanny, question mark, a super nanny until I see another view. Good mass, but do the horns have kink? Nanny. We're kind of all over the map here. Yep.
Yeah, this was a tough one. This is zoomed in. This is from quite a distance away. This was a single goat, by itself all the time. I think I saw it on the way out as well. So this one, we looked and stared, but after a while we concluded it was an old dry nanny. You could see kind of the hip structure, the bones. It looks like it's aging. Even the hide condition, you can't really tell here because the photo's so zoomed in. I do recall it walked fairly methodical and slow. It does have decent weight on those horns, so yeah, we had to look because it looked to me like it had some pretty good mass that it carried. It just doesn't have huge bases, but it's got a fairly mature face as well. But yeah, we were able to see the horns at different angles. And I always say, I guess one of the assumptions I always think is it's a nanny until I can prove it otherwise. Because a lot of times if goats are iffy, it's either a young billy or it's an old nanny. And I kind of typically, you don't want to shoot either of those. You want more of a mature billy, 5 years and older. So yeah, it's kind of like assume something's a nanny and try to prove it into a billy. So yeah, that's what this is. This is a nanny, what we figured. Okay, Adam.
Yeah, so this is kind of fun because it's pretty similar photo. And to play off what Marvin said is it's kind of like anybody that has sheep hunted in the past. There's like legal. It's the legality portion of it, right? Like a lot of guys go sheep hunting. They assume every ram they see is not legal, and they find 2 or 3 with different ways to prove it legal. It's the same with goat hunting. It's better to err on the side of caution. In my experience, what I found is when you find a good old mature goat, and there's no question. And like Marvin said, if there's any question, you probably should just err on the side of caution and walk away from that goat. We are getting an overwhelming amount of billies.
Yeah, I would have said Billy too.
Yeah, well, Sam Nelson, my hunting buddy's in here, and he commented, "What a beast!" So the goat, if anybody's in the chat, the goat's profile picture, that's the goat that's sitting here. So this was what did we decide he was? Sam, chime in the chat here. He's a good billy. We had watched him the night before. He's 13. Yeah, thanks, Sam. So 13-year-old goat, hammer time. You see he's got that Roman nose. He's got that dirty rump. I think we watched him for like 3 hours eating our dinner the night before opening day, and then opening day we woke up and he was gone. Little bit of a gong show, but Sam ended up making a great offhand shot at about 140 yards. We got up into his bedroom and found him, and story was great. But that goat left no question. We've got some video later on in the slides here. Spoiler alert. And you'll get to see him make his bed. But he was a hammer from the start. And when you see things like that nose and just the way that he moved and how methodical he was with every step he took, it looked like there was attitude and thought in everything he did. So when you see a goat like that, there's no question.
Okay. Looks like this was mine. Okay, let's guess the upper one. Obviously the middle looks like a kid. bottom one obviously looks more like mum. And how's the guessing coming in on that upper right goat?
We have Billy, young Billy, looks like a young Billy. People are chiming in on the bottom one, calling it a nanny.
Mm-hmm.
Young Billy up top, young Billy up top.
Yeah.
I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and say that the middle one is a kid.
That's what I thought. It looks. I can't. Would Billy or Nanny?
You know, it could be a young caribou. It's hard telling.
Okay, so we're gonna keep moving along here. So that upper one, I would say yes, is a Billy. Now, if you look at the body and compare it to the Nanny down below, I'd say they don't look much different. So I don't think we've mentioned it yet. Is that often the 2-year-old Billies, say even anywhere from 1 to 3, they'll still hang sometimes around with mom and the nanny and kid groups. So this to me is probably a 2, maybe a 3-year-old Billy. It's hard to count the rings here, but I don't see a lot of rings. It's just that body is not much bigger than the nanny, so that's telling me something right there. The face is, as well is not very thick. It looks like a youngish looking face. So that's, but would it have a slight, yeah, just the horns itself would say that's a Billy. I don't see a kink there, so just there's some good mass there. Okay, what's your guess on this one?
What time of year do you think this photo was taken, Marvin?
Oh my goodness, this one?
Yep.
That's got to be like, well, that's a Darren Epp one, so that's
Mid-June
definitely in the
would
heat
be
of the
my
summer.
guess.
It's when?
Mid-June. I would guess mid-June. He already put it in the chat.
I was going to say maybe early July, but it's definitely not.
It's mid-June. Yeah.
It's mid-June, yeah. I mean, that thing is pretty hairless. That's about as hairless as you find them, but given location, right? It's in the desert. What are you getting for responses there, Adam?
We've got Nanny, an honest I don't know, Nanny I think, question mark, old Nanny, question mark.
Horn looks pretty heavy though.
Yeah, so if I was guessing this for my area, I would have really had to sit there for a while before I made a determination.
Yeah,
Because
so
those are heavy horns.
those are unbelievably heavy, and that's kind of, again, knowing your area. So if you're in a certain area with unreal genetics, yeah, you better take a good look. So as you can see, there's a young one right with it. So again, in this posture here, you should be able to, and we haven't really got into that, looking for teats or looking for a set of nuts, or looking for their sex organs. So that's, and this one you would probably have seen that as well. Again, the body, it's hard. I mean, it looks, if you just saw this goat alone, it would probably look fairly beefy, but if you had Billies in the area, this one will have a lot less, mass in the front end. That horn doesn't really kink a lot, but it's not a real noticeable kink, but it does look fairly straight, and then it kind of bends. It doesn't have that curvature kind of early on. It's kind of just more at the tips. So cool photo though. Okay, looks like I'm up for this one, so take a guess.
I didn't notice this last time I looked at this slide, but there's grass in his horns. That's kind of fun. Like he's been either getting tangled up in them or getting rowdy.
Like what's he doing that for? He's might be trying. You know what he's trying to get is some of the fresh new.
Yeah,
the new green up.
Yeah, he's digging in, finding some good stuff.
It's a John Timmer one, so this is probably down south in the States.
Yeah, a Colorado goat maybe.
Yeah.
So we're seeing Billy, young Billy,
Yeah.
Billy.
Yeah. So like,
Jamie Maher asked, does the river start with a K? Rack around Washington.
there you go.
Oh,
So this
Washington
one,
goat. There you go. Thanks,
Washington.
Darren.
Oh, it's Washington. Okay.
Yep.
Who said that? Who knew that?
Darren.
Darren knew. Yeah. Okay.
That
Makes
the
sense.
nose all says all, bees all.
So I would say this one, I'm looking at a goat with fairly short horns and not tons of mass, but heavier in the bases. You could see a little bit of the, you can actually see a bit of the scent glands and more mass. The face to me looks a little bit younger.
Hides in great shape.
Hides in great shape except the rear end. I don't know what happened.
Don't worry about that guy. That little guy.
Yeah.
Don't worry about him.
So yeah, I would say this is definitely a Billy. Okay, we'll keep moving along here. We're getting closer to an hour coming up. Okay, just guess the far left one.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4 nanny guesses so far.
Oh, just the 4 guesses.
Yep, we're a little bit more reserved on this one, which
Yeah, I
is
think
good,
it's a
in good
little.
taste.
There's like they're thinking this one out. They're comparing all 3 here. You think it's a trick question?
Ed hasn't
Well,
chimed in yet, I noticed.
Ed, okay, we want Ed. I'm not going to carry on till Ed chimes in.
He's thinking. He's thinking.
Ed, you're overthinking it. If you're overthinking it, then that probably tells you something, right?
Or maybe he's finishing up dinner. We should throw him a bone
Uh,
here. Nolan chimed in and said long nanny. We got a couple more nannies in there.
Okay, no Billies though.
No Billies.
Okay, that's a
Chris
nanny.
Clark said XY chromosomes.
Chris, okay. So that is a nanny.
Oh, Ed had to go. Ed left.
Yeah, I think Ed had to leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
Throw
an
him
old
under the
nanny.
bus.
That goat was taken, and yeah, it was an old nanny. But from a long distance away, that's a pretty gentle curvature on those horns, and there's pretty decent mass. And I guess this is one of the key things is goats that are bedded can often look bigger in body. Just it's always good to kind of have a goat kind of moving around. I mean, shooting a bedded goat's also a little bit more difficult. Seems like things can go south a bit more on a bedded animal, but yeah, kind of having that animal stand up to get a better look at it. But it was a single nanny. But yeah, I would have a smaller front end, but it's a little harder to tell when they're bedded. So going to the middle photo, that again is that's an old nanny. Shows a little bit more kink, but from a longer shot, again, without say having good binoculars or a spotting scope, it shows a little bit more mass, but you may not pick out if it's a hot day with the dark background to pick out there's a bit of a curve on that on the tip of those horns. That was a 10-year-old nanny, that middle one. And that far right one, that's a nanny as well. That's me about 25 years ago. So we're not really on here to shame anybody that's taken a nanny. I've taken a couple nannies myself. So, but
On that note, guys, what's the role and I guess benefit of a super nanny in like the local goat population? Like, what if they're past their prime? What's their role?
they actually are somewhat leaders of the herd. So they actually do
Okay.
play a fairly important role. I'm not sure exactly the age that they stop reproducing, but I can't recall. I don't know if anyone else can chime in on that one. does a 12-year-old nanny still produce? I would guess after 10 it's probably hit and miss, but up to 10 I'm sure they're producing. But they do have a fairly, I've read some of the papers, they do have a fairly strong leadership role in the group. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of spot on.
Yeah.
I would say that they're a little bit more moody too. It seems like anytime I've blown anything and been around a nursery group with nannies and kids, it seems like that old grandma finds her way to the front and lets you know, stomping her hoof and kind of giving you the business. This shot here, as answers are starting to come in, I'm actually going to let them come in for a second here before we go diving in. I did want to mention that Marvin talked about, letting a goat stand up and kind of tell you things. A lot of times after a goat's been bedded for an extended period of time, when they stand up, the first thing they'll do is take a piss. And that will tell you right away what it is. So if you're having lunch or having dinner and putting a goat to bed, like it's kind of important, if you're not sure on a group of goats, to have somebody on the spotter or binos, whatever it is, and have somebody dedicated to watching them, because before they go to bed, they're going to take a piss. And if they've been bedded all afternoon, when they stand up, they're probably going to take a piss, and that's going to tell you right away. And then you can use that to identify, the different goats in the group or whatever. Or maybe it'll give you the green light, go, and you can make a plan and go hammer a billy first thing in the morning. So far we're seeing left nanny, nannies. So yes, these are both nannies. This was taken during the rut. I just thought it was a great photo because it gives you the perfect profile looking on, and then you get the great side profile of a little bit of an older goat there on the right. Something to note, for every area is a little different. For my area, most nannies will splay out with a nice Y, like you see on the nanny on the left there. And then they have a pretty distinct kink, as you see on the right. But it's like night and day obvious for me in Southeast here. When you see a nanny, she splays out like a Y. So if you can just wait until a goat looks you head on, it'll give you the no question look. And obviously you see the skinnier horns, the shorter face. Neither one of them have a dirty butt. But that one goat on the left there looks like she has a story to tell. Maybe she got too close to grandma or her mom when her mom had a kid. Maybe she fell. Who knows? But yeah, these are definitely two nannies. So I see a question in the chat here we'll address real quick. So Trevor Graves says, so they typically pee immediately when they stand up. We were second guessing ourselves on our hunt, thinking they might have been stretching because they all seem to make that urination posture. I would say, in my experience, if they've been bedded all afternoon, the first thing they're going to do is pee. I don't know if you want to chime in there. Well, people are guessing on this one, Marvin, if you have any experience to lend.
Yeah, well, I happened to move the slide, kind of worked out well with the question then.
Yeah. Yeah, sure did. Nailed it.
Yeah, and I've had guys up in the field who had to wait it out. They had communication with them, and I just said they're confused on what it was, and I just said wait it out. And sure enough, once it got up from bedding for many hours, it did the stretch, and they took it. I took the goat, and it was a younger billy. So
yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen a nanny stretch like billies do.
I don't think so, but maybe they're I'm just wondering if they were stretching to stretch.
Yeah, it's
not.
I'm gonna pay more attention to that in the field now and see if I can pick a nanny out doing that.
So I'm guessing everyone's getting this one correct.
Yep. Yeah, everybody's nailing it. Older nanny. Yep. So this is your textbook nanny urination posture. This is actually like a nanny with heavier bases. It's kind of hard to tell body wise when they're crouched like this, and when they're in their summer coat, they all look so dang muscular. But you kind of got like a shorter neck maybe, and a lot of times what I've noticed is is with nannies in the summertime, their horns, immediately behind their horn, you'll notice their skull goes straight back, where with billies, you will actually see those glands. And so like this is a good picture to show that, like as soon as the horn ends, skull goes back into the neck and into the atlas joint and down. But that's something that I picked up on summer goats when you're out scouting, or you've drawn your tag, or you have your over the counter and you're looking. It's a good thing to look at.
Yeah.
Those,
Yeah, just see it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the thin neck, and again, the location. This is, if you knew the location, again, you're going to look twice or more than twice because the horns are thick, but that area's got really good genetics, given it's part of the Okanagan.
Darren chimed in the chat and said that Val Geist, RIP, former biologist, warned that nannies do stretch as well for stretching purposes, and it can be deceiving. Yeah. So good to keep
That's
in mind.
what interesting. I kind of guessed that they might simply stretch like any animal will.
Yeah.
So, wow. Okay, Adam.
Yeah. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead and chime in here, everybody. I think this one kind of tells a story. This was during the rut, taken in mid to late November timeframe here in Southeast. Let some guesses come in here. Carolyn Higginson chimed in the chat and said, when I've seen nanny stretch, it didn't seem to last as long as what a pea would, which that's a good point, Carolyn. Billy on the right, left need a better look. Top on the left is a nanny, bottom a Billy. Got a couple more. Billy on the right. Yeah. So everybody's kind of spot on in the chat. Yeah. So on the left, up top, we've got a nanny, and down low, we've got a Billy. And then on the right is just a better picture of the Billy that's on the left. So these two had been doing the dance for a while, and I had been sipping my coffee and watching them. And I just thought it was somewhat of a good field picture. So this photo was taken through a spotter at about 800 yards. That nanny and that Billy, you could kind of get a taste of what it's really like in the field for what you're going to see in the spotter for the difference in the horn girth. So you can see it and it kind of jumps out at you, but until you spend time at looking at one animal, you shift to that picture on the right, it kind of just overwhelmingly tells you it's a Billy. If you take everything into account, you look at his face, his horns, his body structure. He's got a big pot belly. You can kind of tell he's got a sway back, judging by the picture on the right. And then you take the photo on the left that we previously took. And so this sequence of photos just kind of, for me, was something I wanted to show so that it was available to you to show that you could see the importance of what digiscoping brings to you as the hunter, because a lot of times you will miss things as they happen in the field. So say you're watching that Billy and that nanny stands up and she turns around and looks real hard up to her left, and there's another Billy on the ridge up above that you never would have seen. But if you check your video afterwards, you'll be like, oh, I wonder what she was looking at. And then like a lot of times you'll find more goats that way. And so if you are using a spotting scope with the digiscoping setup, it's very valuable in the different ways that you can use it. And that was just kind of what I wanted to present here. Okay, what do we see on this one? I got nanny, 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 nanny. A few more people typing still. Marvin, when you look at this goat, what do you see? What jumps out at you?
I mean, there's some decent mass there. to tell you the truth. The face doesn't look young. The face looks a little bit older as well. I know the neck doesn't look super thick there. It's hard to, that again, that's a bedded angle, so I'm always a bit leery on that. That's a pretty zoomed in goat too. So, but it looks like a little bit more of a curl on those horns. Not a real pronounced kink though, but could go either way.
Yeah, so this one is definitely deceiving. We've got kind of a mixed story in the chat. Bruce Culbertson says, "Let them grow." So this is actually this is an older nanny. You can go ahead and pan to the next shot, and we see she's got her kid from this year, and then a few-year-old Billy there up to the left. I originally thought that this younger goat was a young nanny, but I was fortunately within a couple hundred yards, and I watched that. I watched that goat urinate. So it's like I believe it's a 2-year-old Billy, a kid, and then definitely a nanny. And there was another pair of goats with these two, and it was a young nanny with it appeared to be her first kid because she had very short horns and not very many growth rings. And so that's always something to keep in mind is, obviously when you get these pictures, you're only looking at a limited amount of variables. So, when you see more than 2 or 3 goats together, you're pretty safe to assume that the biggest goats are going to be older nannies, and then those middle goats, more than likely, you're going to have a younger Billy. It seems like it never fails. There's a 2 or 3-year-old Billy always in the mix. So this is a video of that goat from earlier that Sam harvested, and I wish I could have paused it at the beginning. Maybe we can let it play through and come back, because you got to see his hairy danglies there when he stood up, and it told the whole story. But and we have this video in like time and a half, so we can get through it. But you see him making his bed and throwing his dirt up on him and getting all comfy and cozy. This was taken at like 7:50 at night. He was getting bedded up for the evening. Sam was fortunate enough to harvest him the next morning. But yeah, right here where he stands up.
Digging like a grizzly bear. Okay. So there we go. We went through all the slides. Took about an hour. So this part here is probably going to be about a half an hour. Getting into the 4 seasons of goat hunting. This first slide is just more for fun. I call the first season bliss. When you first think about going on a goat hunt, or someone you invite to go on a goat hunt, they're just pumped as could be. It's all rainbows and unicorns. So yeah, that's kind of the start of a hunt. And then once you start getting into the hunt, sometimes there's that anxiety that sets in. Even going to a new area, even if you've goat hunted for years, sometimes there's a little anxiety about, what are you going to find? You're going to be able to find goats. Is it going to be ugly terrain? Am I in good enough shape? Then when you're in the hunt, you can see on some of these photos here, there might be a little bit of regret. Well, let's see what's. Oh, can anybody hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
I think we
Adam
lost
said,
Adam though.
oh, that's why I was confused, because I didn't know if I was disconnected.
Okay, yeah. What was it? Just me? Did I the only one that went?
Yeah,
I
so
think
you disconnected. I thought maybe I disconnected.
Weird.
no, you're there. Both of you are here.
Bummer.
All right, so then there's some regrets, but the survival instinct is in all of us who like to mountain hunt, and we just keep thrashing it out. No pain, no gain. And once the trip's done, you get down to the truck, you have a beverage. Here I got my buddies here. We're getting the goat measured up, getting the CI done. They're all smiles, and they can't wait to come back the next year. So typical, these are the 4 seasons of goat hunting. Now into the real 4 seasons of goat hunting. So probably one of the reasons I love goat hunting. I'm not gonna say I'll goat hunt over any other animal. Like if you were to ask me, I love sheep hunting as well. I love grizzly hunting, but I can't do it here in BC anymore. But what I loved about goats is I can hunt them from August 1st till February 28th, and you can have a longer season if you're in Alaska. So you can hunt, like people would ask me, well, what's your favorite time to hunt them? And I would say summer, fall, and winter. Like they're all different, they're all unique hunts. And for different reasons, it's important to know that. So when individuals are asking, oh, they'd like to go on a goat hunt, or if I ask somebody you want to come on a hunt, I have to ask some basic questions of what kind of experience are you looking at, what's your hunt duration, and really what do you want in a goat. So you're looking for a nice hide, you're looking just for a euro mount, meat consideration. Sometimes if you're late in the rut, the meat can be a little bit stinky, so that's sometimes a consideration as well. So all these things to consider. Billy or Nanny on that one? Yeah, looks pretty beefy. Everyone's going to say Billy. Uh, so I'm going to kind of go through the early season session, and then Adam's going to take the next one. But Adam, you can jump in here if I'm missing anything as well. So kind of just do a high level overview of the different factors, considerations in each season. So when we're talking early season, we're really talking more summer, early fall. So in certain jurisdictions, goats open August 1st. So really, I'm talking August. I'm talking into September as well, potentially into October as well. So really, a summer hunt, you're hunting from up high. It's an alpine experience. So in my view, when I'm taking kind of first timers out for a goat hunt, I typically recommend more of a summer hunt because you're going to have better weather. You're going to have that alpine hunting experience. So you're going to cover more terrain. You can go deep into the mountain range. The days are longer. You've got just a lot more sunlight to cover ground and to hunt. And the weather is a big factor. So typically the weather is going to be a little more favorable. Looking at sort of the hunting itself, in the summer, your goats are typically going to be up high. Similar to say sheep hunting in the summer, the goats are up high for a few reasons. Obviously the vegetation, it's greened up the latest, so you're going to have more nutrients. You'll also have typically more breeze. So what you'll have is the goats will be up higher. More breeze means the bugs are going to get on them less. And obviously they're going to have a good vantage, so they want to be up high. So what that allows, though, if the goats are all up higher, you've actually have less ground to cover. Like if you're hunting later season, they're midway down the mountain in the timber. There's a lot more area to look into. So yeah, if you're more concentrated up high in the nice weather, you'll be able to see a lot of goats. Other things here, weather. Nice weather is good because you can see, but if the weather is really hot, if you're into higher temperatures and blazing sun, goats are really tough to find. They're often going to be in the north-facing slopes, in the bowls, tucked in the cliffs, uh, into the snow patches, into little caves. So they're often very difficult to find. We did a count here a couple years ago in British Columbia when it was really warm out, really hot. I think Darren and a few others were on that count. It was hard to find a goat. So typically, I don't prefer to go the first 2 weeks of August, and that's one of the reasons. It's sometimes almost too hot. Other things, so the goats, say when it is really warm out, they'll come up typically later in the evening, and they would bed on those peaks, and then in the next morning they would head back down into the cliffs and be tucked away. Another consideration in the summer kind of hunt would be your meat care and your hide care. So if you're going up for short, like a weekend, you're probably going to be fine, because when you get a goat, you'll probably come down pretty quick. You want to cool the meat quick, keep it in the shade. But if you're up for 10-day hunts, which typically what I do these days, 10-day hunts, you're going to have to think about the hide if you're going to keep the hide, and bring salt up. So similar to if you're on a sheep hunt. So that's something to consider as well, because if you want the hide and to do to say a shoulder mount, you don't want that ruined. So you better know how to turn the lips, the eyes, the ears, the nose, and then salt it as well. And then keeping the meat cool is obviously very important. But if you're up high, you're probably going to find, glaciers and snowpack and that sort of thing. As far as what you're looking for in the goats, so typically you're not going to have your nannies and billies together. So your more mature billies are going to be either solo, or they're going to be in a bachelor group of, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we found that group of 7 a couple of years ago. So that's kind of nice that the billies are tend to hang together. Looking at your nannies and kids are going to be together. We mentioned this before, the younger billies, the 1 to 3-year-olds will potentially be with those nanny and kid groups. What the advantage, you always hear this, that come from a goat from the top rather than coming from below. So in the summer hunt, you can often get on top of the goats because they may be bedded just below the peaks. There's a good opportunity to come from the top, good opportunities to get close, say if you're bow hunting as well. A big consideration, this is in all seasons really, is working with the terrain, but working with the fog and sort of when the fog and the clouds move in and out. So this smaller photo here, there was a goat, I can see him here. He's bedded, it's pretty small to see. So we were hunkered in our tent. Again, we pitched our tent at the very top, so we have good vantages into the bowls, into the south-facing slopes, and it was pretty much socked in all the time. It opened up the odd time, but to shoot a goat that's 10, 20 feet from the edge of the cliff, you cannot get into this bowl. If you were to shoot a goat and it went into the bowl, that's a big consideration. You need to know kind of the terrain, if you can even access it. So we said, we're not shooting that goat in that position. We're going to wait till it gets up late afternoon. So again, typically the goats are bedded till mid-morning, say 10 a.m. They're up feeding till 10 a.m. and then they'll bed most of the later in the morning and then into the afternoon. So come 3, 4 p.m., they'll get up and feed. So he did exactly what we thought. He went from that saddle and he went 100 or so yards to start feeding on the south-facing slopes. And then the clouds moved in again and we made our move, so the goat couldn't see us, and we eventually caught up to him on this nice slope here, shot him, and then the weather turned on us again. It's really being patient and sort of patterning the goats to see kind of what their patterns are. But again, being very careful on where and when you shoot the goat is important. Multi-day hunts. So getting into the hunt duration, I mentioned that before. I used to do a lot of 1-day hunts, weekend warrior style hunts. Now I pretty much only do 10-day hunts. It just allows you more opportunity to be more selective. So you can go deeper, you can turn more goats down and say, you know what, I got more time. I'm not going to rush it. And you can just wait for days. And when you hunt, say, more coastal terrain, the weather is going to be nasty. You simply could be in your tent for days and days. On this hunt, it was a 10-day hunt. We had 2 days we could hunt out of 10. And we ended up getting the billy, but that's just what you're prepared for. And if you have the length of the time up there, you're probably going to find some decent weather. But yeah, you count on there being poor weather. I've got a comment in about the thermals. So typically in the morning, the thermals, so the wind, it's a slight wind, because the wind is separate from thermals. Thermal is just the air heating up, and then it moves in a certain direction. So they move downslope in the mornings, and then as the air heats up, they go upslope. There's sometimes only so little you can do with thermals, and then again with wind up there, but you can get, we do try to watch that. We get winded, or if the thermal's in the wrong direction, the goats will smell you and they will take off. So often if I'm heading up a mountain and the goats are on a ridge, I will be on the ridge over, say at 200, 300 yards, 400 yards. So that way you're coming from beside them, you're not coming from below, but also if the thermals won't affect you as much. But if there's a whole new weather system, a high's moving in or a low is moving in, and there's strong winds, the thermals won't really matter because the wind will screw you anyways. But yeah, there's sometimes you just can't do much about the wind. I talked about the goats' patterns, bedding close to the escape terrain. And yeah, I did mention, again, just looking at the terrain that you're in, that's critical. You see a lot of goats that are pretty beaten up. You hear of goats dropping off 500,000 foot cliffs and there's not much left. You don't really want to get into that situation where there's, the meat's all torn up, the horns are all busted, and you may not be able to even get to that goat. So that's probably one of the biggest things, not just in the summer, but even in the fall hunts, is when to shoot and when not to shoot. Adam, anything there that I may have missed? And some of these things, again, they'll translate over into the later season hunts. So it's just more of an overview of the style of hunt. I will mention this, in the early season, my favorite time is the first 2 weeks of September. It's a little bit cooler. The hides are thickening up, and you're not going to get snowed in. So depends where you're hunting, but come around September 20th and later, you can get snowed in. So if you're going really deep, you got to come out of over a pass or two, and you got a foot of snow to deal with, or even less snow, wet snow of 3 inches even, it could be treacherous. So that's just my personal preference. If I'm going to do a summer hunt, it's going to be in earlier in September.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And then as far as the earlier season stuff goes, you kind of, it depends on where you're at. Like a lot of people we're talking to are probably either going guided or they're, driving up from down south and doing a longer hunt, walk in. But for those of us that happen to hunt in our backyards, a lot of us will, if we're hunting early season, we'll just watch weather windows, and you have the ability to just throw a tarp in your bag and go. And so that's kind of the beauty of early season, is you can go fast and light. But that's about all I have to say about early season.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move along here to the rut, Adam.
Okay, so hunting the rut, it's very much a different animal. It's later. Your gear choices are the thing about gear in the different seasons is you have so much of this commingling with your gear. A lot of the things stay the same, but your specialty items start to change and get heavier and more bulky. And the thing about hunting the rut is it congregates the goats to a specific area. It takes their attention off of predation. They're more worried about, spreading their seed and fulfilling their natural instincts. And Josh Pyers just said in the chat, it's crampon season. And it really is. It depends on where you're at, but anywhere you're hunting goats in the rut, you're going to see snow. In my experience, hunting the rut is kind of like this double-edged sword, right? Because you've got all these billies that where they're going to be. If you can find a goat on a mountain, you're probably going to find a good billy if you're in a good goat population area, right? If you're in a population dense area, you're probably going to find a good billy. If you know where the goats are going to be, or in my experience, if you have an idea where the goats rut every year, typically they're going to be in those same places. Now, like this year, for instance, in Southeast, we did not have near as much snow early on as we typically do. So the goats were not in their typical rutting areas this year as they have been in previous years because our snowpack's just not what it was. So those goats didn't get driven down, excuse me, by those late October, early November storms. So they stayed way up high compared to where they normally would be. You know, they're 500 to 1,000 feet higher this fall than they had been in previous falls. And so, you know, it's all kind of circumstantial of your area. And if you're fortunate enough to hunt goats in the rut in the same area, you know, year in and year out, like I am, you have the ability to take notes. And so, like, I know that this set of goats is going to be in this general vicinity during the rut, and this set of goats over down across this drainage are going to be in this set of cliffs. And so it kind of allows you to, you know, compile data essentially. And so if you're have the ability to do that, you should. If you don't, you know, you can search out biologists, or if you are fortunate enough to have a mentor, which some of us were not fortunate enough to have. I don't know if Marvin had a very good mentor, but if you do have the access to a mentor, definitely, you know, reach out to them, because experience is the wealth of knowledge. You got to go to know, right? Obviously here Marvin's pretty experienced with hunting the rut. That photo on the right there is that's that Billy and that nanny that we shared earlier that were in that top and bottom shot from the sex ID. So good on him. He saw it through.
Before I move to the next slide here, but I will make a comment on, and Adam, you did mention your chances of finding a very old mature Billy is, in my view, greatly increased in the rut, just because you got so many Billies moving and coming and going. So this goat here, it's a 13-year-old Billy. The big Billy scores well. There was other Billies in this area, and my buddy was ready to pull on another one, and we were videoing it, and the video camera went a little glitchy and it wasn't working. So I told him to hold on, and good thing I told him to hold on, because while I was getting the video camera figured out, this monster came out from the valley bottom, and we took this big goat. Very treacherous terrain. You'll see in the upper left photo, there's rope. Rope's kind of a critical thing. I'm not a rock climber. I don't bring all the gear, but we're not free hanging off the rope generally. I wouldn't get myself into that situation, but the ropes come in handy a lot, especially late season.
And then how about the center photo? Is that the same?
Oh, that's the same one, yeah.
Same hunt, yeah.
This photo doesn't have any more
you,
info on it, but anything else there that you might have missed? What about?
Yeah, I was going to mention, you kind of have some whites on here. If you throw on over whites or snow camo or anything to make you look more like a goat, sometimes in the rut, those Billies are pretty curious. I think back in 2019, I harvested a nice goat, and that situation was kind of similar. We had a kid had popped out of the trees at about 300 yards, and I thought that we were dead to rights because that kid was stomping and snorting at us, and then the nanny followed him, and then fortunately enough, the Billy was right up the nanny's butt, and he followed her out, and it was just one of those perfect situations, you know, right place, right time. You know, you got to stack the cards in your favor to some degree, but sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and that was one of those situations. And you know, the kid had seen us, and I thought that it was all over because the kid saw us and it was up, but the wind was in our favor. The nanny and the Billy had no idea what the kid was throwing a fit about, and they should have listened to the little kid, but they didn't. And fortunately enough, we brought that Billy home. But it's just curiosity kills the cat kind of situation. And if you can put stack the cards in your favor, something like wearing whites or a Tyvek suit. I know it's legal in Alaska. Daniel just commented in the chat asking if it's legal to wear a Tyvek suit to stalk in BC, and I had believed that it was. Can you clarify?
I've done it, yeah. Matter of fact, I was going to raise this. I had a goat come right in on me. We shot. It was November 20th, the heat of the rut, and with that suit on, I had one come right in at me. I pretty much had to stick the rifle in his face and jump at him. He was pretty aggressive. Might have thought I was a goat. I don't know. But when they see white like that, they seem to get a little bit excitable. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fully allowed.
And I think then that, the time of year has a lot to play into that. I know that early season, I've had the Tyvek suit on, and I've had goats just that are in a pressured area just straight up flip me the finger and turn around and walk away. So definitely circumstantial as far as that goes. But in the rut, I would highly suggest if you have white and it's not really hot out, you should probably have something on.
Mm-hmm.
It can't hurt you.
Yeah.
Aside from hunting the rut, there's not a lot more I have to say on it, but during the rut more than any other time, you really need to be considering the position of the goat on the mountain. And when you pull that trigger or you release, you pull your release, whatever it is, knowing where that goat is and where it has the potential to end up, because too many people have gotten themselves in a bad situation just to try and recover a goat. And I know this year in Alaska and Southeast specifically, there was a higher number of uncollected goats because of poor hunter choice when they pulled the trigger. So not only for the goats and respecting the goat, but also for, your self-preservation, be smart.
Exactly. I don't know if we'd mentioned it, but typically, I mean, it's almost all the time when you're hunting the fall, it's going to be south-facing slopes. Rarely am I hunting a north-facing slope in the fall or in the winter. And what I know it's not like this everywhere. When I did a little session for Colorado last year, I talked about braided terrain, south-facing braided terrain, which I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is, but it's basically terrain. It's typically it's going to be very rugged. It's going to have lots of gorges, creeks, tree cover. Like it's got everything that goats are looking for. They're looking for the cliffs, they're looking for the water sources, and they're looking for tree cover. So call it very braided. You can kind of see all the different creeks coming down the side of the mountain. I've kind of looked at that stuff on Google Earth going into a new area, and I've pretty much, as long as you're in goat country, that braided terrain is kind of a go-to for me. But I know in certain areas like Colorado, they didn't really know what I was talking about with braided terrain. So they said the goats are always up high. Summer, winter, fall, they're always up 10,000 feet or so. So I think the thing to be prepared for a fall hunt, it's going to be wet, cold, snowy, foggy. It's going to be miserable. So the key, we did a 10-day hunt this last November. Pretty much we could light a fire every night and dry out. That was critical to our kind of our mental state. So every day we started off pretty much dry and good to go. So that's huge if you're going to go out for long durations. It's having the right gear, and if you can get a fire going, or if you're in an area where there's some wood, you can have maybe a hot tent with you. We talked about rope, ice axe, used that for the first time this November. That was pretty nice. Trekking poles are a must for me all the time. Things like waders for creek crossings. When I started off hunting, I just got the Wiggy's waders this year or last year. But I would strip down. My first goat, I stripped down 3 times and crossed the same creek 3 times in November. That takes time, and it's unbelievably cold. It's
It gets dark early in November too.
It's dark early.
Wasted.
Like it's time wasted. So I should have had them on my
Yeah.
sheep hunt this summer. We did so many river and creek crossings. Like those Wiggy waders, I shouldn't be throwing a brand out there, but I will. They're just so quick and efficient. So just things like that will make your trip more enjoyable and more efficient.
I will. I'll chime in here. You had mentioned it. I have a 100 centimeter ice axe, and I have 2 now. I cannot speak highly enough of the things. It's like my walking axe. I don't carry trekking poles anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I have one trekking pole that sometimes, depending on the hunt style, I'll throw it in my pack if I want it for like setting up a shelter. But that tall ice axe, like I've dug a moat around a camp before to keep water from coming uphill from into our tent and kind of going around the tent. I've used it as a weed whacker. You can use it to pull yourself up in the cliffs because it's a lot more sturdy than a pair of trekking poles. So it just kind of it it depends on the hunter, right? But that's like, if I have one thing all year long that I'm taking, it's a nice axe.
It's my first time using one was this year.
Oh, I love it.
I've been at it for years and I'm still learning tricks. And it was a game changer going up super steep areas where you could reach up to a root or around a small tree and help pull yourself up. Yeah, we used it for digging out a camp spot. Yeah, it's a great tool to have. We'll keep moving here. The last couple sections are going to go a lot quicker. So into the winter season. We initially talked about just like doing a session on winter goat hunting. But I will tell you this, winter goat hunting is not, I would say it's not for the entry level goat hunter. There's a whole raft of other things that you need to consider. There's some positives to it as well, but I will say this, the goats aren't as concentrated. I haven't done a winter hunt for 11 years now. I used to do a lot of them. The weather obviously can be super cold. It can be warmer if you go typically later in, say, February, the later part of the season. This hunt here, that's actually the last one I was on with my nephew here. Massive amounts of snow. You're going to need things like the crampons are key to get up mountains. I've climbed from the base to the top of the mountains because the goats were at the peak on the windswept slopes, having eating the grasses. It's a tough go. It's like to the base of the mountain to the top. That's 5 hours, very icy, crampons on the whole time. So you're going to need a good set of snowshoes and crampons. We're crossing a snow slide here. It doesn't look steep or that dangerous. It's extremely hard packed and iced over and dangerous. You've got to deal with the avalanche issues. I've only taken one February goat hunt and there was avalanches everywhere. It was super warm and we had t-shirts on. Those are the things you got to think about. I actually don't have Abbey gear like the beacons and probes and shovels, but I probably would now. I just haven't done it for so many years, but now I'd probably hunt a bit smarter. But the goats simply aren't as concentrated, so they're harder to find. I find it's the toughest time to locate goats. A lot of them are in the timber, so they're worn out physically from the rut and from the cold. So they're in the timber. They hardly move. They hardly come out. They may come out onto a cliff at times. Then at other times, goats are at the very peak. So that's a tough go on getting up to the top of a mountain with all your gear if you want to overnight it up there. I think I did talk about it. More hard packed snow in general later in the February hunt. But if you go, say, late December and then most of January, it's a tough slog because you're just into a lot of powder. You're into 3, 4, 5 feet of powder. That's not hard. So it's a tough go. The hides are still in pretty good shape, but I find that the goats aren't, they're not as healthy. So the one billy that I took in February, I remember grabbing the hide and the hair just ripped right out. So, and like lots of it, it's just, they're not as good a health. And often the hides I find more matted and the hides aren't quite as in a good condition as say of a November goat. Think I covered most of it there. Anything else, Adam?
No, I don't have. Nope, I got nothing else to add.
Okay. So that was another photo there. Again, there. So we've got the white suit on that upper corner. I find those painter suits though they tear pretty quick and easy. I mean, they only cost $5 or $7 or whatever they were at the time, but yeah, they snag, but they're super lightweight, so they're better than nothing. Okay, let's go into spring, Adam.
Yeah, so the spring, that's pretty much everything you heard in the winter. This is just kind of a good photo. This photo was taken, both photos were taken on Kodiak Island. So Kodiak Island is the only place in Alaska where we get to hunt goats in March. It is an over-the-counter tag, but it's a registration tag, which means that there is a X number of goats taken, they will shut it down. So it is kind of quota-based, but it is an over-the-counter opportunity. for residents and non-residents alike, if non-residents just have to be accompanied by a guide with a contract. But this photo is kind of a great photo to kind of show you what goat country on Kodiak can be like. They're kind of right below the A in Alaska on this slide. I have seen goats as low as right there, and they've been as high as where I'm sitting in the photo of my feet there, staring out of my tent early in the morning. It's kind of an awesome opportunity in the spring, kind of kick off your year, in a great way. Same thing with, doing a late winter hunt in BC there. If you can get out and hunt in January, February, it's kind of a great way to kick off the year. A lot of the concerns are the same. The snowpack is changing. It's getting harder packed. You're, looking at more slab type avalanches. You definitely need to be familiar with avalanche terrain and Avi gear. But like, what a beautiful day, right? The high sun, and anybody that sat in a wind protected spot and had the sun beat on their face, it's a pretty good spot to sit. And then this is just kind of a pano to the left of some goat terrain here, and this is where we have, I have typically found goats late in the winter, early in the spring, is they find these canyons that aren't very high on the mountain, but they get good sun from the south. You're going to see those early sprouts up in the springtime. They've got great escape terrain. Anything tries to chase a goat down in the center of that slide, they're going to be able to out navigate anything. And then on the back side of this ridge, what you can't see is there's a series of cliffs going every which direction where these goats pretty much have escape terrain as soon as they pop up and over. And so basically the big thing when you find yourself hunting goats in situations like this is, crampons are pretty much a necessity, and, a part of the entry level, ropes, crampons, ice axes. Something that we didn't mention earlier is like ropes are great, and the ability to use ropes on a mountain are great, but if you are not familiar with that kind of gear, you have no business even putting it in your pack, because it can get you into such a more dangerous position than if you didn't have them. So just something to keep in mind is if you do have any desire to take ropes or crampons or anything that can, gain you an advantage, you should be aware that it can also put you in a terrible disadvantage if you're not familiar with how to use them properly and safely. So just something to keep in mind, especially when ropes are involved, is if you don't know how to use ascenders and, tie the proper knots and, wear your harness properly and, the proper kind of anchors, etc., how to belay somebody into a position like it. There are different people out there that can, educate you. I'm sure, unfortunately for me, living in a small town Southeast, it's pretty hard to be educated. So I'm a YouTube professor, but I'm sure those of you that are in larger towns would be able to, seek out rock gyms or, somebody put on an Avi class or whatever. But those are the things that come to mind when I see terrain like this, is if you're going to use that kind of gear, definitely make sure you're educated.
The one thing I didn't mention, I wanted to mention, we talked about some of the key gear. If you're not using the crampons, like even in the summer, but really those later season hunts, is a good set of boots with good soles. So I've been with partners where they're slipping a lot, and then I say, let me look at your soles, and they're rounded off. So now with my partners, if they don't live in the same town, if I'm taking somebody, I say, send me a photo of your soles. It's critical. Having a good, fairly stiff boot with good shank. 3 out of the 5 of us on this last November hunt had a mountaineering boot, and it showed. It was a big difference on how we could kick our heels in, side hilling. Just the level of confidence was higher with the 3 of us that had a really good boot, and with basically really good new soles on them as well. So just something to be mindful of. It's a game changer, and to me, safety's critical out there. Adam, you've mentioned many things. The boots is another one in my view. Well, that's almost an hour and 3/4. How many have we got? How many did we lose?
Oh, I think we actually, it looks like we gained.
We gained. How? Okay.
My people will be in touch, Chuck.
Yeah, you're looking for royalties now, right?
We're looking for questions.
Oh.
We're looking for hard questions. Not hard. Any,
Yeah, we have a couple questions on the platform here. I don't know, Adam, were you watching them? I was so intrigued with the
Yeah, I saw a
presentation.
few. So one of the ones that jumped out at me was I scrolling back up here. A gentleman asked Marvin, what size of pack is ideal? And it's actually kind of expired out of the chat. I don't remember who asked it. It might have been a Josh. And I think he was asking 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. I had chimed in and I personally, I have had an external frame. I have done the gamut of packs. I've had an external frame. I'd have a couple different internals, a Kafaru, a Stone Glacier, you name it. But I like the 8,000 cubic inch range, and that's including my lid and my pockets and, however else I set up my pack. But I like to have the ability to have more options than less. So personally for me, because my hunting partner, Sam, I know you're still listening, he has too small of a pack and he needs a larger one. So if there's any sponsors listening, give me a phone call. We can make something
I'll say
work.
I'm a firm believer in what Aaron Schneider says. He's never been on a trip where he's wished he had a smaller pack. I go with the largest pack I can get. My training pack, which I don't take on the mountains anymore, is an 8,400. The pack I have now with all the extras, I'm probably at 10,000. I basically I hunt, and most of my partners we hunt with to hunt together are physically ready, try to be as ready as we can, mentally knowing that we're going to potentially pack our own sheep or goat ourselves. And if you're talking in the fall, I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to take a full, say a life-size goat cape and all the meat yourself. But I want a large pack in order to be able to accommodate and go solo potentially, or take my own animal out. But now the packs all have the extra load shelf, so that helps. But then your weight could be sticking out. That makes it awkward to hike if your pack is, 3
and
feet out
definitely
behind you.
Center of gravity is something to keep in mind if you're looking at that. But yeah, I'm with you.
I'm into go big just because you can cinch it down and make it smaller, but it's hard to make your pack bigger, and you want a lot of junk hanging out on the outside of your pack.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the consumer world that we live in, like the price to go up, 200 cubic inches or 2,000 cubic inches, whatever it may be, it's not that much when you're looking at, what you're really going to pay at the end of the day. And like me and my hunting buddies, we have a plethora of tags in our pockets when we go afield. So, whatever it may be, it's good to have options. So
what really sucks is when you're the guy with the 8,500 or the 10,000 cubic inch pack and your partners all have 5,000s, 5,500s.
That's me. Thanks a lot, Sam. Yep.
That sucks.
You got more room for my spotting scope?
Yeah.
Do you think my sleeping pad will fit in there?
It's like, yeah. Anyway, that's a good plug too for Friday. We're going to get more into the story time, and I'm sure we'll finish off with that. The plug that we'll do there is just having a good old BS session, talking about, the stories and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that'll be fun.
For sure.
But any more questions there?
We got one. Clay Weber's asking, how close to goats do you need to be in order to hear them vocalize hearing the bleats?
I've been as far as 300 yards away and heard. So I harvested a billy, and the rut and the kid and the nanny went like this on the mountain, and we were about 300 yards away. But mind you, dead calm, light snow. And we could hear them vocalizing back and forth until they got back together.
Okay. Yeah, no, good point. I think it's all conditional, right? Based on wind and, whatever else is going on. Another question here. Do you guys e-scout for new areas? Is it such a thing as, for example, with mule deer?
E-scout all the time. I mean,
I
hunted before Google Earth, right? Because I was hunting pretty much before the internet. So Google Earth is phenomenal.
Father time here.
Well, Google Earth was a game changer. But
Marvin's old.
I'm old.
Hey, so am I.
I've been married 30 years. I can't be that young if I've been married 30 years.
He's got more hair than I do, so it depends on what we're calling old here.
Yeah, e-scout. Like I'd mentioned, I scout out. I rarely, and I didn't say this, maybe I'll talk about it Friday. I rarely go back into the same spot twice. Like I love to see new country. That's just love to explore. So what I do is e-scout. And again, in the fall, I'm looking for those braided kind of south-facing slopes.
And like e-scouting, there's so much to dive into there. Maybe we'll touch on it on Friday because
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
so many
yeah,
different
for sure.
platforms and things to use,
Yeah.
and it's a good cliffhanger to make people show up on Friday.
There is.
Exactly. I have a question. I think we'll finish off, and then we can, like you said, we can carry stuff into the Friday session too. So we'll make note of any questions that are left. But I'm going to ask each of you this question. Marvin touched on it at the very start of the presentations here. Favorite goat recipe, Adam?
I'm gonna make Marvin go first since he made me present
Okay.
first.
Oh,
Oh, there you go.
I told my wife when she made the roast recently, and I just finished it tonight here at work. I said, "That's the best roast you've made. What did you do to it?" The roast was good, but actually, our go-to favorite is we get the sausage done up, so it's a cheese jalapeno smoky. That's kind of our go-to all the time. But goat, I mean, I like it in burger. I I think we had the heart one year. Loved heart. I love the organs. Right. I had liver, but liver wasn't so good on the goat. So I'd say the favorite is the sausages, but
Right on.
I don't know. I like
Adam?
it all.
Yeah, kind of a convoluted question because my favorite way to eat goat is half cocked after we brought it home, frying up back straps in the skillet, in the kitchen
For sure.
as we're reminiscing on the hunt, but or over a fire in the field. But in the home, like my wife and my two young boys, like we hammer down on goat burger, whether it's tacos or meatballs or meatloaf. I mean, we have goat tacos like, once a week until it's gone. And then we ask Uncle Sam to bring some more goat burger. But there is one thing that I have done with black bear that I have not done with goat. And if somebody has an opportunity to do it before I do, I highly suggest trying blackening in an entire front quarter with blackening seasoning. Let it cure for 24 hours and then put it on the smoker. And you put it on the smoker until, you can do one of two things. You can put it on the smoker for, 3 hours until the smoke is penetrated and it won't penetrate anymore. Probe it, finish it in the oven until it comes up to temp. But I have had no better black bear than a whole quarter blackened and smoked on and smoked on the smoker. So that is a goal of mine in the coming years, is to blacken an entire goat quarter, and then it basically falls apart and you have pulled goat or pulled bear, and then you can package it in 1.5 pound freezer bags, and then you pull it out anytime you want serving. So that's something I'd like to try in the future.
Now my mouth is watering now. Thank you very much for that, Adam.
My pleasure.
Well, guys, we are closing in on our drop dead time frame here. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. The presentation was great. Lots of great engagement and a lot of gems in there. So we're going to continue this on Friday. So thanks to all the members for chiming in. I think we got pretty close to 60 participants tonight, which is awesome. So we appreciate you all. We're gonna kill the live stream for now and give us a couple days. Blake's going to do some editing and clean it up and post it up on the platforms. On the podcast platforms. And there'll be a link to it on Spike Camp and on the socials. So join us for the third session this Friday night, 7:00, January 12th. We're going to have a round table of a bunch of goat killers. It's going to be a fun one. So make sure you join us.